Hey, there we go. Just before we get started, I do parties. I'm terrible, absolutely terrible. And if you want me to practice, it costs way more money. So it's all Marx Brothers joke anyway. But I'll go back to that. That was actually DevOps Days Austin. We actually we got a whole karaoke band, and people came up and jammed. It was like totally awesome. People just. That's what I suggest when I'm coming. Yeah, we had people you know how many musicians are in our industry, people just came out, hey, can I play? Yeah, come on out, man. It was awesome. All right, we'll go ahead and start. Security Compliance Theater, the 7th Deadly Disease. Anyway, you saw this. I'm Botchgaloop. That's where I live, Twitter, GitHub. It's a terrible name, but that's how you find me. So if you hate this presentation, you can tweet and say, I hate this presentation. But you'll probably be gone before I finish. I'm going to go real quick on my, I got a lot to cover, and I really want to cover some really meaty stuff, and hopefully I don't run out of time. But I've done a lot of stuff. Probably more interesting to this, I've done 11 startups in 40 years. I've authored 12 books. Most of them nobody has ever read. Probably the interesting thing, started my career at Exxon. I worked on one of the first private cloud infrastructures for Canonical. It was called Ubuntu Enterprise Cloud. It was terrible. I was really early at Chef, 9th person, helped build really everything that wasn't pure development. Had a company I sold to Dell. That was kind of cool. And then I sold the company to Docker. And I spent 2 years in the hurricane tornado of Docker, but we won't talk about that here. Just quickly, some of the books. The DevOps Handbook, a co-author of that book, so that was good. And this one, this is my only, except my last slide is my only gratuitous, one Audible credit. One. All right, so if you got 8 Audible credits, in truth, it's an audio only. Me and Gene Kim did it. If you like lean learning organizations and resilience, safety, and that kind of stuff, it's awesome. If you don't like that stuff, don't waste the credit. I've got 2 books coming out this year. The DevSecOps Handbook. And then I'm going to talk about this. This is a white paper I did about 2 months ago with an incredible team called DevOps, kind of automated governance. And so I'll kind of end up with that discussion. Anyway, so level setting. With DevOps, right? DevOps is, and then there's all these what is DevOps? And you ask 10 people, you get 10 answers. Here's the thing. They're all correct, right? So there is no wrong answer. I mean, there's ones I may disagree with, but if you're selling a CI/CD pipeline and you say DevOps is here, God bless you, right? But a few years ago, I started getting called into high-level CIOs and some CEOs where I had 5 minutes to explain DevOps. And I struggled with this, and this is for myself, I came up with this, how would I do this? And I'm going to stick with this. I'm not trying to convince you that this is the canonical definition, but DevOps is a set of practices and patterns that turn human capital into high-performance organization capital. That's it. Sorry, folks, it's not Kubernetes. I mean, Kubernetes is awesome. X-Ray and Artifactory is awesome. But this is the hard stuff. That's my son. I don't know if you've ever seen the Grand Canyon thing, the horseshoe. It's pretty cool. Here's the other thing, too. So I left Docker about 2 years ago, and I was convinced I'm going to do transformation. I spent 10 years with vendors. Prior to that, I did consulting back when it was incredibly hard to do transformation with the technology there was 15, 20 years ago. It just didn't work. Spent 10 years at places like Chef, and then a company, OpsCode, of course, Chef, and then Docker. And then I left. I said, I'm going to go out now, not be anchored by a vendor. Even though the vendors let me do what I do, but I still had that kind of vendor anchor with me. Oh, you're the Docker guy, or you're the Chef guy. And I was going to go out and I'm going to use all these tools, all these things I know. I'm not the smartest person in DevOps, but I would challenge anybody to say they've studied this space stronger than me. I mean, I am a student of this thing we call DevOps. I was the only American at the first DevOps day. And so what I found out is all these tools like lean value stream mapping, and I'm not going to go through this stuff right now. It's in the handbook. That was too late. There was a whole set of questions, like a level 0 discussion you had to have, how people thought. And so I came up, like, because you go into people like, John, we don't need you. We got safe. Like, okay, you know. Or like, we got Agile. Or, you know, we got DevOps. Like, these are like abstractions that actually do you harm. Again, I'm not being a hypocrite. I love DevOps. But the bottom line is read that. You can't lean, Agile, safe, or DevOps your way out of a bad organizational culture. You just can't. And you know, I kind of stole this from Christina Maslach. You don't know, she's the leading authority on organizational burnout. And I've gotten to know her, interview her. And in a conversation we had, she made this thing about burnout. And I realized, oh, it just so fits our world, which is whenever you're talking about any kind of change or improvement, you're counting on a bunch of human beings to change and make it happen. If they haven't been part of figuring out how to do it, the change efforts will be dead on arrival. Like, you can't go into an organization of like 35,000 people, and because 200 of them like did this amazing pipeline and all this stuff, and then tell the rest of the organization, you have to do this, without talking to them. And so what I did, my kind of thing when I came out, and I thought, okay, I'm going to these big companies, large banks, like top 10 banks, and I'm going to do all these tools, and I realized I have to do something different. And I don't even have a name for it, but I call it organizational forensic. And for those of you who are like, oh my God, is this not a security person? Yes, it is. You'll see. This all funnels down into the 7th deadly disease. So I spend these time with people, and I basically interview hundreds and hundreds of people. I talk to, like, you know, a development team all day on Monday, another development team all day on Tuesday. And I just ask, like, these, and I really just try to create a conversation to find out how they think things work. And there's a point at which you start getting them to start telling you this incredible amount of truth about the organization. The other thing I do is before I go, I actually get like on a call with a bunch of leaders. And I learned this from Kevin Baer. He's one of the co-authors of the Phoenix Project. And this is like an incredible tool. It's like, it's better when you do it in person. It's like that Rorschach test. You hit somebody with, like, before you even interview, ask, say what you do, what are the 5 things that your organization is not doing that you should be doing? And what happens is, before they get to like the 3rd answer, they're like, holy shit, I can't believe I told you that. And you interview like 20, 30 of the leaders, and you get this, and now you can aggregate up. So I did this for a pretty large company, and here's the kicker, and I guess I won't say no disrespect to like the Big 5, because I am disrespectful to the Big 5. You know, so I go to a CIO, and I show her this chart, and she knew she had a capacity problem. But this was like 30 or 40 of her leadership. And when I told her that her leadership basically said the number one problem in our organization was communication, she literally pounded her fist and said, you know, I spent millions of dollars with McKinsey for over a year, and they didn't tell me that. Now here's the joke. I charged $10K, McKinsey probably charged $5 million. So who's the winner? But here's the 7 deadly diseases. And I have other presentations that focus on all of this. And so I'm going to go through the first 6 reasonably quick to satisfy. Brooks was like, you have to do security. You can't do it. I'm like, all right. So I'm going to quickly drive what the other ones do to get me to the funnel, which is, it sort of magically works too. I'd like to say I was some kind of genius and thought this up front. But what I found was if you went through this kind of work thing, and I'll talk a little bit about it, by the time you drill down the funnel, you literally, in most cases, have proved that the organization, for what they think they're doing from testing to audit, is all theater. And I'll show you some examples. And then, so the 7th is the security compliance theater. And then I just put some of the things that, like, you expound, like vulnerability theater. How much do you pay for your vulnerability scanner? 10 million. Oh, mine's 12 million. We're awesome. Like, it's not that easy. Toby Powell at Capital One, he was the first fellow at Capital One. He's a good friend of mine. I do a lot of work with him. He was asked by his CIO, so Capital One's like 15,000 Java developers, 70% Java. he was asked, how much open source does Capital One use? So Topo was actually one of the guys who worked on the original jar project, right? Like he knows Java. And so anybody want to guess what the number was? And if you've heard my presentation before, you're not allowed to answer. Anybody want to take a wild guess? No, come on. Be bold. What? No, how much open source? That's the worst answer I've gotten, so I'm sorry. I owe you a beer, but that's good. I just made fun of you. Now I'm going to make up for it. It was 99%. Imagine 15,000 developers, 70% of all their code is Java. 99% of it was open source. So Topo tried to answer one more question, which he wasn't asked. How much of it were they actually using? I'm going to make you guess. It was only 10%. So the dependency map of our, so I spend the whole presentation on like how complicated scanning and dependencies are, but that should just scare the shit out of you in terms of how complex this problem is. And I don't care what AI you put on it. If you start following like the struts 2 and like some of the embedded methods in there and Bob's from ThoughtWorks, I mean, it's insane. So one of the things I do is when I get people in a room is I do this, like, so in a room and people are like, what is this guy doing? Another person is going to make my life better. Like it's all like they're really ready to eat me alive, right? And I walk up to a chart and I just draw a box and I say, where does work start? I'm like, what? Oh yeah, where does work start? I'm like, that's not a good question. I'm like, okay, where does work start? John, you don't understand capital markets. I'm like, yep, you're right, but where does work start? On average, it takes me a freaking hour to get people to answer that question. They want to argue for an hour why I, like, you really can't. And then finally, like, okay, if you must know. I'm like, great. Now I can ask you, like, what percentage, what gets documented. And so the first deadly disease is invisible work. I find in average, a mediocre company captures about 50% of all the work that they do. So when I do the readout to CIO at the end, right, and they're like, how do we do, John? I'm like, really bad. I mean, I kind of want to smoke a cigar and put my sneakers up on their wooden desk, right? Like, well, what do you mean by that, John? And I like CIOs, I'm not making fun of them, but well, let me put it this way. If it built airplanes, I would not fly on them. And they're like, okay, John, give me specifics. I'm like, okay. I estimate that you have well over $1 billion IT budget, and you only capture 30% of all the work that goes on. What other part of your business? Like, what if the finance guy said, like, every other Wednesday, we're gonna roll things up? Like in IT, we're sort of a joke. We're a bunch of cowboys. If 70% of what's going on, all right. So the point is, and I'm going to go a little faster now. This is interesting. How many people read the Phoenix Project? Yeah, everybody almost, right? So there's the whole brand. But Gene did this like incredibly interesting thing, right? Where it was actually Kevin Barrett and Gene, but where he literally simplified Little's Law and Q theory so that like my mom could understand it. Like it's brilliant, right? Which is so like if you're a Q theory or Little's Law, like don't yell at me, But like the deal was there's a point at which the question is asked, how come it takes you 63 hours to do a 15-minute task? And somebody says, well, let me explain. Everybody is about 90% busy, so in general, there's a 9-hour backlog for every hour of work. You got 7 downstream dependencies. So what you thought was that one little piece of work actually equated to and I find this when I go to people, I'm like, why didn't you record the work from that team? Oh, that's Sue team, they're always good. And later I find out there's like all these dependencies, and like, well, that's not my problem. Yeah, but you didn't record it, so we don't even know that it wasn't 15 minutes. And so John Ospa has this thing, again, I'll have this presentation up. I won't spend a whole lot of time. He's created this idea called dark debt, based on dark matter. So imagine you're a $1 billion IT budget. You only capture 30% of everything that's going on. And you actually heard of the thing called the butterfly effect. What do you think is actually going on in your infrastructure? Like unresolved chaos under the thing that you don't even see because it looks like it's dark matter. again, I'm trying to go through there's a longer version of misalignment. You find that this becomes incentives, how people, what they're, in fact, I just did, interesting, I just did a company, and this is hard. I got to go back to CIOs and tell them, like, terrible stuff. Now, the good news is I only do one-time gigs. So, like, that's my advantage over, like, IBM, Deloitte, and all those guys. Because they won't tell the CIO the things that I will tell them, because they get really freaking mad. So this woman, this one company, literally has this incredible MCGs, right? OKRs, MCGs, all bullshit. Like, you want to have a conversation about it, they're all just bullshit. Non-determinism, complex deficit systems, another discussion. But she had this MCGs, mission critical goals. I don't know what book she read. Tableau, like screens. So I interview like 200 people. And I get everybody on this final day where I'm like, this is what I'm going to tell your CIO. Tell me if I'm wrong. This is your chance. And I said, basically I heard that you're pretty good at, like they're doing sprints 2 weeks, that you're pretty good at like 80%, and 20%, kind of capacity and buffering. But what you told me was all the goals or none of the 80% work have anything to do with the MCGs. And in fact, you have to steal the 20% time to update your records to get those things so they show up on the Tableau. I got to write this report to this woman. And so the thing is, and so there's quickly, right, like you can't do a DevOps presentation without mentioning Conway's law. So checkbox done there. But like, so here's the thing, right? So most of you probably are like sort of development focused, I'm just guessing. And so your context of, if you don't know what Conway's law is, read that real quick. You probably think of Conway's law in terms of microservices as a kind of anti-Conway maneuvers, or different names for these things like decoupling, and so your typically architectures are built on your organizational structure and design, and you want to decouple. But it's not just for code, it's the way your organizational structure looks too. So I looked for this, and like, so everybody's heard about the Equifax breach, right, in 2017? Still today, the largest financial breach. There's been bigger ones, but financially it's still 5 billion market cap loss, still to this day. So Conway's law, question. I won't say what's wrong, what's odd about this slide? Second beer. If you don't drink beer, a really fancy Coke float. Come on, be bold, mighty forces come to your age.
IT has no relation to security.
Yeah, I mean, Susan Moldine, the CSO, reports to the chief delivery officer. Guess what? You're not an IT company, right? So it gets worse. So this is the 2000 in December. If you want to read a train wreck, if you like train wrecks and outages, the Congress did an incredible job documenting the Equifax breach. 2018, it's public. So one of the questions they asked was, when she came on board, she was the CSO. She had a good background. She was a smart woman. Like they tried to blame everything on her. No, that wasn't the problem. They asked, didn't you think it was odd that you were reporting to the chief law officer? And she basically said, yes, but I figured they knew what they were doing. They call that actually pluralistic ignorance. But here's the kicker. This is the like Conway's law, like bleeding, oozing. I won't make you read the whole thing, but they asked when you found out the PII, personal identifiable information, was compromised, why didn't you go to the CIO? And she basically said, I don't remember thinking about that. Of course she didn't. She reported to chief legal officer, right? That's it, right? How many people heard of like I-shaped, this concept of like shaped I, T, or E, right? So again, I'll just slide. What we're trying to do is get out of the like, I'm the Oracle DBA. That's all I do. So maybe I do Oracle and Mongo, and I know how to do some Node.js or Go. To the high performers like get to this sort of E shape or comb, where people have lots of skills, sort of SRE-ish in a way. And one of the things that you probably heard the concept of two-pizza team, right? I try to get people. I listen and I say, well, how should you start migrating to how you're thinking? And you want to get to like, there's no good argument for being all I-shaped. There really isn't. T or E shape. And so this concept of a build run, right, where you have the autonomous teams and you start breaking out, that by general nature starts creating E-shaped individuals. Because everybody becomes collaborative and knowledge-based, and it's really paying off a level of technical debt in terms of your skills of your people. And then complexity, again, I'll go through this really quick because I do want to get to the security stuff, but again, here's the point. All of this stuff, if you remember that funnel, drills in to my final argument is, and by the way, there's probably some out there, but it's never been that this isn't true, where I can literally tell the CIO, everything that you do on your audit is just bullshit. But how you think about, so like if you want to read like Sidney Dekker or watch what John Allspar is doing from resilience, complex systems, psychological safety. I mentioned this, normalization deviance is interesting. This comes from like the Challenger disaster, a woman called, I know I'm going really fast, but you ping me, I'll give you whatever links you want. But Diane Vaughan wrote a whole book about Challenger, and she called it, the NASA had this normalization of deviance, where you just see things that are bad, and you get used to them because it doesn't blow up. So you start accepting that as a normal thing until the day people die. And this one, I don't know why I put these things in here because it always makes me run out of time, but I got to tell, how many people have heard the Abraham Wald story? You probably have, you haven't heard that way. So Abraham Wald was a statistician during World War II that was brought in. They had a whole team of these brilliant statisticians to try to figure out how to repair planes when they came back with bullet holes. So they were doing all this thing about the weight of the metal, where to place it, where to cover the holes. And somewhere on the way, he had this epiphany. He's like, you know what? We're total idiots. We're thinking about the place where the bullet holes are. Those are the planes that are coming back. We should be thinking about the places where the bullet holes aren't, because they're the ones that aren't coming back. But here's the thing. When I do these interviews, I look for these people. I'll interview 5 build run teams, and every one of them will tell me, yeah, the business just can never get it right. They give us we want the red button. We give them the red button, they say, it should have white linings. So then we give them the white linings, and it should have purple lettering. And then I find a team where it works magically. And then I say, let's figure out what the product owner is. And I talk to the product owner, and I find that product owner has these characteristics that somehow get things done in a place where nobody else can get things done. I'm like, okay, let's figure that. You all know there's somebody in a company give it to Jane. Use that as the Abraham Wald. It's a complex emergent idea, is that instead of trying to figure out all the ways to do things, find the things that are working really well and follow those. And then, most people, I don't know what the enterprise versus, startup versus, but there's a race in large enterprises. And the gap between the people on this corner of the building doing Kubernetes and Docker and all that stuff, and the people over here that's still running Remedy, Atrium, and CMDBs, they are so far apart that I don't know we can ever get them back together. But, and again, I'll go through this quick because I have longer versions. So what is a CMD? What is the relevance of a CMDB today? Topol Pal Capital One says, John, 4 years ago when I started kind of DevOps in earnest at Capital One, I had basically 400 services. Today I have 50,000 services, right? Microservices. And by the way, some are ephemeral. We don't know who they are. I think we have to, as an industry, figure this out. We need a service catalog. We need, but nobody's actually trying to bridge these worlds in an honest way. Microservices, I'll talk about delivery mesh. I mean, if you've got a group that's still doing IDLE and ITSF, and you're trying to do SRE over here with SLOs, where's that conversation happening? Your service mesh aware. Again, very quickly, I go into companies and 5% in an organization have ever even heard of Istio Envoy. And that's table stakes. That's basically table stakes. Sorry, if you don't know what it is, you're not playing the game. And that's even before I talk about multiple meshes, because there are other meshes out there. Things like framework identity for nodes or in a mesh architecture. And then let's get into API extensibility in Kubernetes and CRDs? I don't know the answer. I'm just like trying to identify in an organization that you got to figure out how, you can't have both. You can't have people with a CMDB that's about 30% accurate in any given day and then expect to send, I don't know, whatever your favorite honeycomb or SignalFX events to people because you don't got anywhere to send them. Because you don't got an accurate service catalog. All right, moving faster. This is the delivery mesh thing I think is really interesting. I think it's worth a whole long conversation. We talk about service mesh and how things are working. We don't have a whole lot of conversation about what they happen before they become in production. So it's like, what is, and again, I go on for a long time and I don't have that much time to go on. But like, if you want to geek about it, I don't know the answer. The one thing I do know is, why isn't Swagger a first-class primitive in all our deliveries? Right? I mean, why? Because here's the question. How many people pen test their API tree structure? Be honest now. Yeah. Rooms of 1,000. 3 hands go up. Right? Again, I'm not saying, I'm just like, let's just make Swagger a first-class citizen. We can basically in the build, you know what I mean? But we're not even having a conversation about that. All right, DevSecOps, we're finally here. Drilling down. This guy's getting mad. He's like, I thought this was a security presentation. I'm just kidding. Now I owe you a beer too. Y'all stop laughing, that sucks. So this is actually how a company, an insurance company that I work with, like where we did the full deal of how do you do kind of DevSecOps in a pipeline. And really what it means is you have your pipeline and you're just going to do the abstraction overlay of all things security in there. Again, I have a whole presentation. If you were here last year, you heard a good part of that presentation. And then you saw me on stage with the mentalists make a fool of myself. So how many people saw that? Yeah. Thank you. So the deadliest disease of them all. The 7th, right? Why 7? 7's cool. Why do I call it deadly disease? Because it gets me on stage. In general, it's just patterns. It's just patterns. You know, when I go to a client side, I'm just using these patterns to put things in buckets. So yeah, I mean, so literally, so again, the longer version of this is if you're only capturing 30% of your work, if you've got misalignment of incentives, if you've got management system toil, your company's like, there are 10 different ways to create tickets for the 30% that you do create. We use SharePoint, oh, these guys use Jira, these people use, with different contexts. So even if you tried to aggregate, you can't. You know, the Brent in the Phoenix story, like this is tribal knowledge. Like I look for the, in fact, the first company I did this was this guy named Lou. And so now I call it the Lou circle. So as I'm mapping this stuff, I draw circles, like I found another Lou. Right? And they're the people that seem to be the people that never say no. They're as friendly as nice as can be. And they know how to fix everything, but they have no time to explain how to fix it. So the junior people that come on board quit because every time they ask Lou how something works, he's like, I'd love to tell you, but I don't have no time. So you have to horizontalize that. You know, organizational design we talked about, not just microservice, but in general, you don't want that Equifax scenario. And then complexity, like getting people to realize complex adaptive systems are a real thing. You have to think differently when you have this sort of dark matter idea, like things are very complex. You have to think more, I mean, I'm going to get really scary here, but you have to be more quantum about, you know, on some of the infrastructures now that are running, like top 5, type 6 banks, right? These are incredibly complex systems. I mean, they may still have mainframes and COBOL, but the aggregate of them are like beyond human comprehension complexity. And so just like when physics went from Newtonian to quantum, they had to switch to be more probability-based. So there's a point at which our industry has to get better at being deterministic about, I'm going nuts here, but deterministic about like this shall always look like this. And if it doesn't, we'll hammer it in. To like, no, these are adaptive systems and you have to sort of think differently about emergence and patterns of emergence. You know, it's way out there stuff, but we're in this realm. So this all bubbles down to like, you know, you have workarounds. People are not documenting work. You know, you send tickets to a change advisory board every Wednesday. And, and so that, like, I talk about this kind of shift left auditors, right? Like, so what we really have to do, right, like most large corporations have like 2 levels, some, depending on who they are, like 3 or 4 levels of people they have to test. A bank, it's like internal RM, and then regulators. Like, my banking friends say, like, John, here's the deal. If we lose our license, we're not a bank, right? Like this is very simple math. I see places that have all these different review boards. The architecture review, the project review, the CAB. At one company that was so embedded in their job scheduling XML into their application. In fact, I had to walk away from this company. That they actually had an XML review board. Their XML job scheduling was so tightly coupled with their code that it literally had to have its own standalone review board. Yeah. Checkbox compliant, I talked about, and then you find how many people, when you find out about, like, the woman who runs payroll for like 40,000 people says, you know what, I'll put in the change record to CAB on Wednesday. I'll play that game. By the way, my backup documentation is the same documentation I've been using for 2 years. Don't even change the dates. Even put a little message in there. If you see this, call me. Like, in other words, people don't read it. I had one company, 51 reviewers. When they were back to try to figure out how to do automated governance, there was only 3 people that ever reviewed, and none of them actually read. Right? And so people, this woman who did the payroll says, well, here's the deal. I know how to put thing in production if I need to. Like, it's my code. I own it. There's a big capital market company, right? She says, if the Wednesday afternoon cab is going to stop people from getting paid, I'm making the change. Right? And you find pockets of these things all over the place where, like you get people to admit, like, they're using ITSM idle, and like, how many people, when they know it should be a major impact change, put minor no impact because they don't want to go through the cab? All hands go up. Then I asked, like, the head of security, like, don't you have a bar chart or something that shows you that there are a gazillion of these and like 2 of these? Well, if they get caught by the auditor, and I go back to people like, you get a slap on the wrist. So this is the most exciting thing I probably worked on in my whole career. And so DevOps experts, here's the DevOps handbook, tell CIO, you got to get rid of the cab, buddy. And they're like, here's the thing, John. All you DevOps experts tell me how the cab is evil, how I got to get rid of it, but you never tell me how to do it. Because I got regulators, I got RMs, I got internal auditors and external auditors that need proof. So I'm sticking with subjective attestation. What's attestation? The proof that you did the things or you're doing the things that some form of policymakers are telling you should be doing. So my framing over the last year has been, we need as an industry to change subjective attestation, which is me sending you a change record, you looking at it and saying, yeah, okay. Him looking at it and say, I think I'll let this go in my production system. And then 6 months later, some auditor says, oh, what's the change record for that? Oh, it's some remedy ticket, and these human to human humans all said it was good. What's the efficacy on that? 30, 20%? As opposed to an objective model where it's built in and automated and there's no humans. So this idea of DevOps automated governance, it was actually Kit Merker, I don't blame him or whatever. He's got me started on this idea about 1.5 years ago. And there were some other companies that were doing some of this idea that we could build attestations into the pipeline. So I think of an attestation as sort of I dare to say, cough, cough, blockchain, but it's not really blockchain. It's just a linked list of crypto events that have a list that has a SHA that says that you did all the things and it's immutable. That's it. There's a trusted source. How many people read Liquid software book? You should read it. Honestly, I love JFrog. They're nice to me. They do great things for me. I finally read the book. It's a really good book. The metaphor of liquid, they did a really good job. But they have, and I actually stole the paragraph from the end. But so the idea is like you build these attestations in the form of kind of hashed crypto events that are immutable. Now your efficacy is really high. It's not a human to human. And so one of the ways that I started thinking about this is Topo Powell in 2018 wrote this article about how Capital One does DevOps in the pipeline. And it's out there, and I get you the link if you Google this, the focusing on. But he said that we have, and originally he called them gates, now he calls them control points. That in order to get a system managed at Capital One, in other words, if you want to have an auto approve, so this is like their gamification of auto approve. If you want your service to go through auto approve and not have to go to the cab, you have to evidence that you do those 16. Now it's 29 today, but you had to evidence these things. So somebody had to basically look and say, yep, you're doing all these things great. You can be auto approved. I mean, depending on the change. There were some changes obviously wouldn't. He's migrated that now into this kind of terminology of control points. These are control points that are, think of them as immutable kind of crypto hashes with a trusted source that you did this, and some list that you did all of them. So what I did is, Gene Kim, once a year invites about 40 people down to Portland, and we work on these sort of case study or research projects. And I've been going for 6 years. I'm like fortunate to be part of that cabal, right? And like some of the biggest companies show up. He invitation only. I'm bragging, but anyway, I've been going for 6 years. Most times I just float because I have more fun just floating around. Early on, I wrote the Mythbusters one, but this year I decided, you know what? I'm going to basically prefab my project. So I called somebody I know who runs all retail at Nike. The guy who runs basically one of the largest commercial Kubernetes, most revenue for a company generating through, I mean, we're talking 30, 40 billion in a production Kubernetes of Marriott's revenue. The guy who runs Azure, a guy who runs all the infrastructure at PNC Bank, Topo Powell from Capital One, and we threw in Mike Nygaard from Release It just for fun. And we basically built a reference architecture of what it could look like to do automated governance. And so what we did is, the first thing we did, so you gotta imagine, there's a whiteboard. You got the guy from Marriott, PNC, Sam Guggenheim, if you don't, he's like amazing, and all standing up there. I got goosebumps, and we're trying to figure out how do we explain the world, and there's a million ways to define the pipelines. And we're not saying this is the de facto way you should all describe pipelines, but for what we were doing, this is what we came up with. There were 7 stages, 2 of them ran on their own cycle. So again, I don't have real time, but dependency manager artifact had their own stream, but they became inputs to build or package. Great, thank you. And then we said, okay, so that's the template of the stages of how you do things. Again, there's hundreds of different people who have different ways to do this, but for our purposes, and this book will be out later this year. It'll be Creative Commons. And again, just the people who were in that room, just like I say, I can't tell you. When I watched Marriott and PNC and Microsoft Azure argue about what's the best control point, or we do this here, it was incredible, and it's all documented. We basically put together a reference architecture of basically 65 control points based on all those companies' best what they do. Think of it things like, does it start in source control? Even human-based things, not everything automated. Did you do a pairing, a peer review? All these things as attestations. I mean, we're still embryonic. I don't know exactly how all those attestations will wind up in an attestation database. And we did 3 sample reference implementations. The one we got the first was with Google's Grapheus. So if you know what Grapheus is, interesting. It was actually designed for this problem. It's been open source. It doesn't get talked about. We did simple Java microservices to Kubernetes. And my buddy, John Rezatowski at PNC, I always say I suspect when he takes a shower, he uses Kafka to run the water. I call him John Kafka Rezatowski's. So he, of course, built the whole, guaranteed delivery on Kafka. So we got a nice working prototype with Grapheus. We have another one that's based on Hygeia from Capital One. And just to show you, there's, here's, I'm going to show you all the stages, but here's the source code one, right? The risks, and then these were what we defined as, and again, this is just a starting point. We're going to open this up and ask people, what are your control points? What does this work? What is I want to turn this to a very open and collaborative thing where we can start having an honest conversation about how do you actually move from subjective attestation to objective attestation. So these are the 5 that we came up with. The actors, the actions, we always define input, output for each stage, and then the risks. And again, I'm not going through all the ones, but I figured since we're at JFrog swampUP, I'll cover the artifact one. And so, controls there only allow updated from trusted package source, has to be a mutable artifact, a retention policy. Again, we're not saying this is what you have to be. This was those 5 or 6 companies are really smart people agreeing that this is a very best. And there was 65 in total out of these 7 stages that we came up with that are documented with descriptions, inputs and outputs. Artifact is interesting because we didn't know, do you call the output an artifact? Yes. We try to be really tight on terminology too. It becomes now more of a mutable artifact at that point. In fact, artifacts mutate, right? So in summary, these are the 7 deadly diseases. You try to figure out how to get a higher retention rate on capturing visible work. You really need to capture 100% of your work. I mean, you don't have to be a time clock, but I don't know how you can actually attack, the dark debt, the complex systems without actually knowing what you're doing. Again, nothing with respect to Atlassian, but people tell me, we're going to put Atlassian in, it's going to solve everything. And yeah, but you're only capturing 30% of what you're doing. What part are you improving? Consolidate work systems, collaboration, bottlenecks, institutionalized knowledge, inverse Conway maneuver. Understand that there are parts of your organization, not just your code bases, but your way again, that kind of Congress report of Susan Maldine and reporting, those things just kind of eat you alive. Again, I can give you tons of good references about, resilience and blameless and human factors. And I think, automating governance. And I took this, I put this in our paper, and I needed to reword. There's a last paragraph in Liquid Software that they did an incredible job explaining, but it was sort of focused. It wasn't as general focus as I needed. So I literally wrote my own version of it, but I literally say, in other words, I could not have written this paragraph had I not read Liquid Software. But I did rewrite this myself. And, you can read it yourself really quick, but basically and they do an incredible job in Liquid Software, sort of ending up with this. Read Liquid Software. In other words, you need to prove, it's about trust. Great, perfect. It's about trust, right? And, trusted source. I mean, it's one company, one of the reference architects, they're using Vault. So they literally, they create all their signatures from Vault. That's their authority, right? There's a lot of ways to skin this. And one other thing too, right? Think of if this is what is he talking about? So imagine not only are you sending up these immutable crypto events in some list, but imagine that when you do the build, you tar up all the logs from the build, you hash that, and that goes up in the list. So imagine when the auditor walks in and says, this can't be broke. Maybe when quantum breaks through, maybe. But for now, nobody could have tampered with the build logs. Because again, I don't want to call it blockchain. It's just a linked list of crypto events that are immutable. And the auditors will catch on that, yep, we're done. 35-day audits turn into 4-hour audits. Where's the provenance of this change? Oh, here's the hash. You get it. It's like everything else we use in the bank. If this doesn't work, then nothing else in our bank works either. We're done with that one. What's the next one? Oh, next one, same thing. All that said is, I do have a booth. The one on the left is my son. I'm teaching him how to, like, he's a third-year electrical engineering student, Georgia Tech, gotta brag. If you feel so inclined, I'm teaching him what sales is like. I'm giving him like a taste of our industry, and sales sucks. It's hard. So if you have my permission to go over there and give him a hard time, because he's like going gung-ho about, Dad, what should I say if they do this? So we can have a little bit of fun if you want. We might try to sell you something, but we won't if you don't want us to. And we do have a couple of books, so we only bought like 20 books, but if you create a really good conversation with those guys, they'll give you a book. I'm done. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.